Hey guys, today I'll show you a fantasy thriller TV series named Once Upon a Time Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The drama begins with a legend where all the fairy tale characters live together in an enchanted forest of the town, Storybrooke. Prince Charming found Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. Just like in the classic tale, the prince awakens Snow White with a smelly tongue massage and they prepare to wed. But just as the story is about to conclude with a happy ending, Snow White's powerful stepmother, the evil queen, crashes the wedding, vowing to take revenge at all costs and destroy the fairy tale world. Before she can make her dramatic exit, the prince throws a sword at the queen, but it fails to harm her in the slightest. As time passes, Snow White becomes pregnant with a snow baby, yet she remains fearful of the queen's curse. Seeking peace of mind, she decides to consult a dangerous imprisoned imp called Rumple. The prince is initially reluctant, but considering their child's safety, reluctantly agrees. Rumple, who already knew Snow White would come, demands the name of her unborn child in exchange for information. Cornered, Snow White agrees. Rumple reveals that the evil queen has created a powerful curse to freeze time in the fairy tale world, trapping everyone in another place for eternity. The only hope to break the curse lies with Snow White's child, who will return at the age of 28 to lead the fight against the evil queen. Alarmed, the prince quickly leaves with Snow White. Rumple, displeased, insists that Snow White fulfill her promise by revealing the child's name. After much hesitation, she finally whispers the name Emma. After meeting Rumple, the prince gathers allies to strategize against the queen. Doubts linger about their chances of success until a forest fairy presents a magical tree, claiming it can withstand any curse if crafted into a vessel. The only downside is that it can protect only one person. The castle's carpenter and Pinocchio quickly begin crafting it into a wardrobe. Initially, the pregnant Snow White plans to use the wardrobe for safety. But as labor begins, a dark cloud approaches the castle. It's the evil queen's deadly army. Thankfully, Snow White safely gives birth to her snow baby, Emma. Understanding that Emma must be sent into the wardrobe to have any hope of defeating the queen, the prince races to the wardrobe. By this time, the evil queen's army had already stormed the castle. The prince, though exhausted, managed to slay 2 soldiers before placing the baby inside the enchanted wardrobe. However, before he could make his escape, the pursuers caught up to him. The prince, now at the end of his strength, was quickly defeated. Fortunately, Emma had already safely escaped, allowing the prince to die in peace. When Snow White arrived, the prince had already breathed his last. The evil queen, now victorious, also arrived on the scene. Though she failed to capture Emma, there was now no one left to stop her from destroying the world. In the end, the fairy tale world dissolved into the rolling black mist. The scene shifts to the present time, where a young boy named Henry is flipping through a fairy tale book. The story he's reading is about Snow White. Alone, Henry has arrived in Boston, seemingly in search of someone important. Meanwhile, a woman named Emma is preparing to meet an online acquaintance. Today also happens to be her 28th birthday. Emma is Snow White's daughter, and now she works as a bounty hunter. Her online acquaintance is the debtor she needs to track down. For the experienced Emma, dealing with this target is just another day at work. After completing her task, Emma returns home to celebrate her birthday alone. Unexpectedly, Henry shows up at her door, claiming to be the son she gave up for adoption 10 years ago. His purpose in coming is to ask Emma to take him back to his home in Storybrooke. This explosive revelation catches Emma completely off guard. But since Henry is her biological son, Emma reluctantly agrees to give him a ride. On the way, Henry tells her that the fairy tale book he's been reading contains real stories and that Emma is one of the characters. Unfortunately, Emma doesn't take this seriously. Late that night, they arrive safely in Storybrooke, but Emma notices that the town's clock is stuck at a little past 8. Henry explains that the clock has never moved because the evil queen's curse has frozen time in the entire town. All the fairy tale characters are trapped here. As they talk, Henry's school psychologist happens to pass by. After a brief conversation, Emma learns that Henry was adopted by the town's mayor. However, Henry insists that because of the curse, everyone in the town has lost their memories of the fairy tale world. In reality, the psychologist is Jiminy Cricket from the story of Pinocchio, and Henry's adoptive mother, the mayor called Regina, is none other than the evil queen, the mastermind behind it all. It's no wonder Henry has always disliked his adoptive mother. Emma takes Henry back to Regina's house. Upon learning that Emma is Henry's biological mother, Regina invites Emma inside to try some apple cider. During their conversation, Emma brings up Henry's fairy tale book, but strangely, Regina seems unaware of its existence. Emma, not wanting to say more, prepares to leave. However, on her way out, a wolf suddenly blocks her path, causing her to swerve and crash into the Storybrooke sign, knocking her unconscious. The next day, Emma wakes up in the police station. The town's sheriff had mistaken her accident for a DUI and had locked her up. Just then, Mayor Regina arrives at the station, asking the sheriff for help in finding Henry, who has run away from home. Upon hearing this, Emma offers to help. As an experienced bounty hunter, it doesn't take her long to track Henry's spending. The records show that Henry used his teacher's credit card to pay for his journey to find his biological mother. This teacher, who is none other than Snow White reincarnated, goes by the name Mary. Shortly after, Regina brings Emma to confront Mary, but it turns out that Henry had stolen Mary's credit card without her knowledge, and she has no idea where Henry might be. With this, Regina decides not to waste any more time, but Emma stays behind to chat with Mary. Through their conversation, Emma learns that Henry, due to being adopted and Regina's strict upbringing, has become a lonely child with few friends. To provide him some comfort, Mary had given Henry the fairy tale book. Understanding Henry's situation, Mary reveals that she does know where Henry is. With Mary's help, Emma soon finds Henry. To her surprise, Henry holds no resentment towards Emma for abandoning him, as Snow White had also sent Emma away to protect her. Now, Henry only wishes for Emma to stay with him for a week. Though Emma is initially hesitant, perhaps out of guilt, she ultimately decides to grant Henry's request. Afterward, Emma takes Henry back to Regina's house and informs Regina that she plans to stay in town for a while. This infuriates Regina, who fears Emma might take Henry away from her, and she immediately orders Emma to leave. But Emma, unafraid, checks into the town's inn instead. While there, she encounters Mr. Gold, the reincarnation of Rumple. Now appearing as an ordinary man, Mr. Gold is one of the wealthiest individuals in town, and he owns most of Storybrooke. Strangely, after Emma's arrival, the town clock begins to move again. At the same time, Mary, who works part-time as a hospital aide, is tending to patients, one of whom is the reincarnation of Prince Charming. The next day, Regina secretly flips through Henry's fairy tale book, only to find that the pages towards the end have been torn out. Henry explains that old books tend to lose pages, but Regina isn't convinced. She immediately takes a basket of apples to Emma, urging her to leave Storybrooke. However, Emma can see through Regina's deceitful smile, and Regina, realizing there's no point in pretending, bluntly threatens that if Emma doesn't leave, she will destroy her at any cost. This threat mirrors the one the evil queen once made. Back when the evil queen returned to the castle, she intended to use the dark curse to destroy the world. Even her father and the magic mirror were shocked by this revelation. It turns out that the evil queen had once made a deal with another witch, Maleficent, the one who cursed Sleeping Beauty. The evil queen had traded the dark curse for Maleficent's sleeping curse, but now she wanted to back out of the deal. Unfortunately for Maleficent, she was no match for the evil queen, who easily defeated her and reclaimed the dark curse. The evil queen then gathered her allies to cast the spell, but despite her efforts, nothing happened. Dwarfs mocked her relentlessly, enraging her to the point where she turned them to stone. To uncover the reason for the spell's failure, the evil queen was forced to visit the dungeon to consult Rumple, who had taught her the dark curse. Rumple, naturally, had conditions of his own. In the new world the evil queen would create, she would have to grant any request he made. Knowing she would lose her memories of the fairy tale world after entering the new world, the evil queen agreed. Rumple then revealed the answer. To complete the spell, the evil queen would have to sacrifice the heart of someone she loved. Since Snow White, her true love, was already dead, only her father could fulfill this requirement. Blinded by her desire for revenge, the evil queen coldly took her father's heart, completing the final step of the spell. After the spell succeeded, the evil queen erected a gravestone for her father, whose name was Henry. Back in the present, Henry gives Emma the torn pages from the fairy tale book, which tell the story of Snow White sending Emma away. He hopes Emma will accept her true identity and break the evil queen's curse. To make Henry happy, Emma pretends to believe him and agrees to investigate the matter with him. During their investigation, Emma accidentally discovers that Mary is the reincarnation of Snow White, but she still doesn't fully believe in the fairy tales. Following Mary's lead, Emma goes to ask about Henry from Dr. Hopper, the reincarnation of Jiminy Cricket. She learns that Henry had been sent for therapy before he received the fairy tale book. To help Emma understand Henry better, Dr. Hopper even hands over Henry's treatment files to Emma, unaware that he is doing so under Mayor Regina's pressure. It's all part of Regina's trap. Soon after, the sheriff shows up, saying that Dr. Hopper has reported Emma for stealing Henry's files. Unable to defend herself, Emma is locked up again. Meanwhile, Regina tells Henry what happened, but Henry immediately sees through her lies and realizes she is framing Emma. He asks Mary to bail Emma out. Once freed, the first thing Emma does is head to Regina's house and saw down her apple tree, signaling her intention to fight back. With their conflict now out in the open, the innkeeper, under Regina's pressure, has no choice but to evict Emma. Regina even orders the sheriff to arrest Emma again for property damage, but the upright sheriff refuses. Left with no alternative, Regina invites Emma to her home for a truce. Seeing Regina lower her stance, Emma opens up, expressing her concern that Henry is struggling to distinguish between fairy tales and reality, which she believes is a serious psychological issue. She explains that she stayed in Storybrooke only to help Henry. Little does Emma know that Henry is eavesdropping and hears everything. It turns out this was another of Regina's traps. Demoralized by these setbacks, Emma goes to thank Mary and confides in her that she's thinking of leaving Storybrooke. But Mary reminds her that she is the only one who can protect Henry. These words are a revelation for Emma, who then rushes to Henry, telling him she's willing to believe in the curse and will do everything she can to defeat the evil queen. To prove her resolve, Emma burns the torn pages of the fairy tale book, finally reconciling with Henry. Meanwhile, Mr. Gold visits Regina, subtly hinting that Emma is not to be underestimated and offering his help for a price, just as he did when arranging for Henry's adoption. The scene shifts to Mary being on her first date with the doctor, but unfortunately the conversation isn't going well. The doctor seems more interested in the waitress, Ruby. Seeing this, Mary decides to cut her losses, pay the bill, and leave. On her way back, she spots Emma sitting in her car reading a newspaper. It turns out that Emma can't stay at the inn anymore and is now sleeping in her car. With a kind heart, Mary invites Emma to stay at her place temporarily, but Emma, who's used to being on her own, politely declines. The next day, teacher Mary takes her students to the hospital to volunteer. Naturally, Henry is only interested in David, the man who is the reincarnation of Prince Charming. However, David has been in a coma for a long time, and no one knows his true identity. Henry, having read the script, suggests that Mary read the story of Snow White and Prince Charming to David, thinking it might wake him up. Emma encourages Mary to give it a try, reasoning that if it doesn't work, it will prove Henry's theory wrong, helping him see reality more clearly. So with a tentative attitude, Mary begins to tell the story to David. To her surprise, David responds by gripping her hand. But when the doctor arrives, he notes that David's physical condition hasn't changed at all, suggesting that Mary may have imagined it. Disheartened, Mary heads home to rest, but as soon as she leaves, the doctor reports the incident to Regina. In the fairy tale world, the meeting of Snow White and Prince Charming was also fraught with difficulties. At the time, the prince was traveling in a carriage with his fiancée when they were blocked by a fallen tree. The prince, showing humility, helped his men lift the tree out of the way. However, his sharp eye quickly noticed that the tree had been deliberately cut down, indicating an ambush. Sure enough, a mysterious figure suddenly appeared and stole the prince's Ferrari horse. The prince immediately gave chase in his Tesla and quickly caught the thief, only to discover that the mysterious figure was a sexy woman, none other than Snow White herself. Taking advantage of the prince's momentary hesitation, Snow White escaped for her white life. Furious at being tricked, the prince swore to catch her for humiliation. Not long after, Snow White returned home, gathered her belongings, and prepared to leave. But after just a few steps, she was caught in a trap set by the prince. The prince demanded that she return the stolen jewels, including a ring that had been his mother's and held great sentimental value. Snow White, recognizing him as the prince, pointed out that his kingdom was on the brink of collapse, forcing him into a political marriage with his fiancée to unite their two kingdoms. The prince, in turn, produced a wanted poster identifying her as Snow White and told her that she must help him recover the jewels, or he would hand her over to the evil queen. With no other choice, Snow White agreed, and the two set off on their journey. During their travels, the prince became curious about the necklace Snow White wore. She quickly explained that it contained fairy dust, deadly enough to kill the evil queen. As they talked, Snow White also revealed the reason she had been hiding in the woods. The evil queen had sent a huntsman to kill her, but he had spared her life, allowing her to hide in the forest, where she survived by stealing from the queen's convoys to save enough money to escape to another kingdom. She had mistaken the prince's party for the queen's men, which is why she cut down the tree. As they spoke, they reached a river and stopped to rest. Seizing the opportunity, Snow White suddenly pushed the prince into the river and fled with the bag of coins. Unfortunately, she soon ran into scouts sent by the evil queen. Without her fairy dust left behind with the prince, she was defenseless. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, the prince appeared out of nowhere and fought off the scouts. However, Snow White was captured. Thankfully, the prince's skill with a bow allowed him to strike the scout holding Snow White, and the two were reunited but without a kiss yet. After this incident, Snow White finally agreed to help the prince recover the jewels. She knew of a group of trolls nearby who dealt in stolen goods and led the prince to their bridge. She placed the coins on the bridge, and the trolls appeared. Snow White offered to buy back the jewels, asking only for the ring. The trolls, after some thought, agreed. But when the prince grew impatient, the trolls became suspicious. Although the fairy dust didn't catch their attention, the wanted poster did, and the trolls, tempted by the bounty, decided to capture Snow White. As they moved to take her away, the prince stepped forward to fight the trolls, telling Snow White to run. Snow White fled for her shitty life but soon realized that the prince hadn't escaped. She returned to find him in grave danger and was forced to use all of her fairy dust, turning the trolls into insects. In the end, they had saved each other's lives. After escaping from danger, the prince offered gold as a reward, and Snow White returned the ring. To their surprise, the ring was a perfect fit for Snow White. It was clear that after their harrowing experience, they had developed hormone feelings for each other. However, with the prince still bound by his engagement, the two had no choice but to part ways with heavy hearts. Back in the present, Mary recounts her encounter from the previous night to Emma and Henry. Henry is thrilled and eagerly drags Mary back to the hospital to tell the story again. However, when they arrive, they discover that David is missing. Coincidentally, Regina is also there. It turns out that it was Regina who found David unconscious by the roadside years ago and brought him to the hospital. With the situation now critical, Regina orders the sheriff to find David while she quickly takes Henry away from Emma. Surveillance footage reveals that David left the hospital on his own and headed into the forest. The sheriff, Emma, and Mary set out to search for him, but the forest is vast and they have no leads. Unexpectedly, Henry shows up and suggests that David went to revisit an old spot to reconnect with Mary. Sure enough, the three soon find David unconscious by the river under the troll bridge. Mary performs CPR and miraculously revives him. David is quickly returned to the hospital, but shortly after, a woman bursts into his room. It's the prince's fiancée, who is now officially his wife in this timeline. Naturally, her timely appearance raises Emma's suspicions. Regina explains that they reviewed old surveillance tapes and discovered that David often mentioned his wife's name in his piggy sleep, which led them to find her. With that, Mary can only watch helplessly as David and his wife reunite. After everything settles down, Emma decides to move in with Mary temporarily. The next day, while dropping Henry off at school, the sheriff approaches Emma. Impressed by her efforts in searching for David, the sheriff offers her the position of deputy sheriff. Emma hesitates and says she needs time to consider. Unlike the sheriff, Regina is less kind. She mocks Emma, calling her a rootless drifter, which stings Emma. Distracted, she accidentally spills her coffee. Frustrated, Emma heads to the laundry room to clean up, where she meets a pregnant young maid named Ashley. Coincidentally, Ashley, like Emma, is also dealing with an unplanned pregnancy at a young age, giving them common ground. As someone who's been through it, Emma advises Ashley to stay strong and not let others dictate her life. As a matter of fact, Ashley is the reincarnation of Cinderella. The scene shifts to show Cinderella's story. As in the classic tale, Cinderella meets her fairy godmother on the day of the prince's ball. But before the godmother can use her magic wand to transform Cinderella, she is blown to smithereens, and in her place appears Rumple. Rumple is willing to help Cinderella, but not for free. He demands she sign a contract first. Desperate to change her fate, Cinderella agrees. We can skip ahead to the day of Cinderella's wedding to the prince, with Snow White and Prince Charming attending as members of the royal family. Just when Cinderella thinks everything is going perfectly, Rumple shows up to collect on his promise. But he doesn't want gold or jewels. He wants Cinderella's firstborn child. Realizing the gravity of her mistake, Cinderella decides to run away as soon as she becomes pregnant. Unfortunately, the prince returns from hunting just as she's packing to leave, forcing her to confess everything. Determined to protect their child, the prince vows to capture Rumple at any cost. The prince quickly devises a plan. He has his men repair the dungeon and asks Snow White to use a bluebird to summon Rumple. During the meeting, Cinderella is to lie, claiming she's pregnant with twins and offering a new deal. Rumple, eager to seal the deal, will likely agree. Then, she is to trick him into signing the new contract with a quill enchanted by the Blue Fairy. Once he signs, Rumple will be trapped. The plan goes off without a hitch, and Rumple falls into the trap. However, he warns that no one can break a deal with him. No matter where Cinderella goes, he will claim her child. Not long after, Rumple was loaded into a prison cart, but his words continued to haunt Cinderella. Worse still, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. Seeing this, the prince hurried off to fetch water, but he never returned. Realizing something was wrong, Cinderella rushed to confront Rumple, who claimed he had done nothing. He reminded her that magic always comes at a price, and the prince was simply paying the cost. Rumple offered her a deal: hand over the baby and the prince would be freed from his fate. Otherwise, he would be doomed forever. Back in the present, under the cover of night, Ashley sneaks into Mr. Gold's pawn shop, searching for something. As if expecting her, Mr. Gold catches her in the act. Desperate, Ashley grabs a can of pepper spray and douses Mr. Gold, knocking him out long enough to grab a key and open a specific safe. The next day, Mr. Gold seeks out the bounty hunter Emma, known for her skill in finding people. He explains that Ashley stole something valuable from him, but he doesn't want her jailed for it. Instead, he asks Emma to help him find her. Emma agrees and tracks down Ruby, who knows Ashley well. Ruby reveals that Ashley's boyfriend disappeared as soon as he learned she was pregnant, and her stepmother and stepsisters couldn't care less about her situation. With no other leads, Emma decides to track down Ashley's ex-boyfriend, who turns out to be the reincarnation of the prince. After some digging, Emma discovers that the prince's father opposed their relationship and pressured Ashley into making a deal with Mr. Gold, trading her baby for a large sum of money. It seems that Rumple's deal with Cinderella has carried over into this world. After learning this, Emma rushes back to Ruby only to find Ruby's car missing. It finally dawns on her that Ruby must have helped Ashley escape by giving her the car. Ashley was headed for Boston, so Emma quickly sets off in pursuit. She soon finds Ruby's car broken down on the side of the road. Ashley is about to give birth. Emma rushes her to the hospital just in time, and Mr. Gold arrives to retrieve his item. Determined, Emma tries everything to negotiate with Mr. Gold, but he remains stubborn and unyielding. In a last-ditch effort, Emma offers to make a deal with him for Ashley's baby. Mr. Gold agrees, ever interested in deals, but only on the condition that Emma owes him a favor in the future. With the new deal in place, Ashley's baby is safely delivered, and Emma reassures her that she can now raise her child in peace. With the curse lifted, the prince's reincarnation is finally free to return to Ashley's side. After this ordeal, Emma decides to accept the position of deputy sheriff and stay in town. It's quite a coincidence that on Emma's first day as deputy sheriff, an unexpected event occurs. The old mine in town suddenly collapses. Regina quickly arrives at the scene, and to her surprise, she learns that Emma is the new deputy sheriff. Resigned to the situation, she instructs Emma to maintain order while she gives a speech, promising to fill in the mine and pave a new road. However, Henry objects, believing there might be something important hidden beneath the mine. In fact, Regina has found a mysterious fragment there, but she has no intention of revealing this and instead wants to keep people away from the mine. Henry, however, remains insistent, convinced that Emma caused the mine to collapse. Regina, unwilling to let Henry continue interfering, orders Dr. Hopper to crush Henry's fantasies and bring him back to reality or face losing his job. Dr. Hopper is torn, much like he was in the fairy tale world. Back then, his parents made a living as puppeteers, but as a child, Hopper didn't learn the craft. Instead, while the audience was engrossed in the puppet show, he was forced by his parents to steal money from them. This wasn't his choice, but he had no way to refuse his parents. As the years passed, he continued to follow his parents, moving from place to place, deceiving others. Yet deep down, he remained kind-hearted and dissatisfied with his life, yearning for freedom. Only the innocence of children provided him with some solace. One day, while delivering a report to Rumple noticed his inner turmoil. With his vast powers, Rumple created a magical potion for him, with the condition that once the potion took effect, he would leave the victim behind for Rumple to collect. Seeing freedom within reach, Hopper eagerly accepted the potion. That night, Hopper's parents once again took him along on their deceitful schemes. They easily gained the trust of a young couple, telling them they had seen signs of a plague on their journey, but had been spared thanks to a supposed elixir. The couple, convinced by the story, handed over all their valuables. Watching his parents act so heartlessly, Hopper could no longer stand it. He took the magical potion and threw it at his parents, but nothing happened. It turned out that his father had switched the potion, selling Rumple's magic potion to the young couple instead. By the time Hopper rushed back, the couple had already used the potion and were transformed into two shriveled puppets. These puppets are still displayed in Mr. Gold's pawn shop to this day. Worse yet, the couple's child was the young boy Hopper had met earlier. Devastated by the series of events, he prayed for a way to make amends. To his surprise, a fairy appeared, but even she couldn't bring the boy's parents back to life. To atone for his actions, Hopper asked the fairy to turn him into a cricket, free to live alongside the boy as he grew up. That boy would later become the carpenter who made Pinocchio. In the present world, however, there is no Rumple and no fairy to save the day. Dr. Hopper, torn by his conscience, tells Henry that everything he believes in is just his imagination, and that if he doesn't stop, he'll have to be treated as mentally ill. These harsh words shatter Henry's spirit, and he returns to Emma in tears, seeking comfort. Angered by what she learns, Emma confronts Dr. Hopper, suspecting that Regina had threatened him. But before she can press the issue, Regina calls to inform her that Henry is missing. Dr. Hopper immediately guesses that Henry has gone to the collapsed mine, and they rush there together. Meanwhile, Henry has indeed ventured deep into the mine, determined to uncover the secret buried beneath it. Suddenly, the mine collapses again, forcing Henry to run for his life. At this crucial moment, Dr. Hopper enters the mine alone to find Henry. The two eventually meet, but Henry, unaware of the danger, still wants to continue exploring. Dr. Hopper has to persuade him to leave the mine. Above ground, everyone is scrambling to come up with a rescue plan, but the mine continues to collapse. Luckily, Hopper and Henry find an old elevator and attempt to start it up. Unfortunately, those above ground decide to use explosives to blast an opening, but the explosion only jams the elevator midway. The rescue operation stalls. Fortunately, Emma has an idea and releases Hopper's dog, which uses its keen sense of smell to locate the smelly two. After some maneuvering, they manage to open the passage to the old elevator. Thanks to this effort, the rescue is a success, but the damaged elevator means someone needs to go down and bring them up. After some discussion, Regina reluctantly agrees to let Emma, being more physically capable, take on the task, and the two reach a temporary truce. Before long, Emma finds Dr. Hopper and Henry deep in conversation. Just as she pulls Henry up, the mine collapses again, causing the elevator to plummet. Thankfully, Hopper holds onto the rope, and the rescue is successfully completed. However, as soon as Henry is safe, Regina reverts to her cold demeanor, not even offering a word of thanks. Having reflected on his conversation with Henry, Dr. Hopper decides to stick to his original treatment plan and warns Regina that her stubbornness could cost her custody of Henry. Regina backs down. Though Henry's instincts weren't entirely wrong, the mine does indeed conceal a significant secret. Meanwhile, Mary, still volunteering as a hospital aide, continues to spend time with David. Their relationship deepens, but since David is married, Mary decides to resign from her position to avoid further complications. David soon recovers and is discharged from the hospital, returning home with his wife. Unfortunately, his memory hasn't returned, and he doesn't even remember the windmill that used to be in front of their house. To celebrate his homecoming, his wife throws a party, inviting many friends. But David's mind is elsewhere. He's more concerned about whether Mary will attend the party. His wife quickly picks up on his distraction. At this point, Regina steps in, playing the role of a supportive friend, helping David navigate his feelings. Unable to contain his urges, David sneaks away to confess his feelings to Mary, only to be rejected. It's not that Mary doesn't have feelings for him, but she's too kind-hearted to interfere in someone else's marriage. Despite this, David refuses to give up. The next day, Mary learns from Regina that David has broken up with his wife. Regina uses this opportunity to warn Mary to stay away from him. But before Mary can act, David shows up at her door, confessing that he feels nothing for his wife due to his memory loss and only wants to be with Mary. He knows Mary has feelings for his muscles too, and tells her that he'll be waiting by the river that evening. Unsure of what to do, Mary turns to Emma for advice. Emma reassures Mary that it's okay to follow her heart. That evening, Mary went to the riverbank as promised to wait for David. However, unfamiliar with Storybrooke, David had to rely on a map to find his way. But he ran into Regina, who, upon learning he was going to meet Mary, deliberately pointed him in the wrong direction. As a result, David ended up at Mr. Gold's pawn shop instead. Upon hearing David's story, Mr. Gold pointed him in the right direction. But while in the shop, David discovered the windmill from his home, and this triggered the return of all his memories. He then went to the riverbank to tell Mary that he had regained his memories and also remembered his love for his wife. He had decided to return to her, leaving Mary heartbroken as she watched him walk away. Meanwhile, during the night patrol, Emma noticed someone climbing out of Regina's window and quickly apprehended the intruder, only to discover it was the sheriff. She was shocked to realize that the sheriff was having an affair with Regina. Meanwhile, David returned home and apologized to his wife, and the two reconciled with a hormone yoga session. In contrast, Mary had no one to turn to but the doctor, drowning her sorrows in Long Island iced tea to find some peace for the night. In the fairy tale world, the story of Snow White and Prince Charming was equally fraught with challenges. At one point, the prince was engaged in a fierce battle with a bandit. To defeat the bandit, he faked his death, successfully outwitting his opponent. This fight was actually a trial arranged for the prince. It turned out that his kingdom was facing financial difficulties, and a neighboring king, King Midas, hoped the prince could slay a dragon plaguing his realm. Midas, known for his golden touch, turned the prince's sword into gold as a down payment for their agreement. However, just as they were finalizing the deal, the prince was fatally stabbed by the bandit, who wasn't quite dead after all. Faced with this sudden tragedy, the king sought Rumpel's help. Years ago, the king had made a deal with Rumpel to have a son, as he and the queen were unable to conceive. Now, the king offered to betray the family's fairy godmother in exchange for his kingdom's survival. Rumpel revealed that while the prince couldn't be brought back to life, he had a twin brother who could take his place. Years earlier, Rumpel had made a deal with a poor couple, trading their farm for their firstborn son. Now he approached the prince's brother, offering him a life of luxury in exchange for taking the prince's place. With no real choice, the brother agreed to become Prince Charming. Since the two brothers looked identical, King Midas didn't notice the switch. As for the task of slaying the dragon, it was left to the king's elite knights, with the new prince merely expected to finish off the dragon after they weakened it. However, the dragon proved far stronger than expected, and the knights were quickly defeated. In a critical moment, the new prince, disregarding his own safety, saved his comrades and bravely fought the dragon. Using his wits, he lured the dragon into a narrow gorge where it got stuck, allowing him to slay it. He returned triumphantly with the dragon's head, and Midas was pleased. But Midas wanted more than just a dragon slayer. He also sought to marry his daughter to the prince as part of a political alliance. The prince, unwilling to enter a political marriage, initially wanted to refuse. However, the king, determined to unite the two kingdoms, threatened to kill his mother if he didn't comply. Resigned, the prince visited his mother on the farm to say goodbye, telling her he had agreed to Midas's proposal. Understanding her son's predicament, his mother gave him a ring symbolizing true love, telling him to give it to his future wife. Shortly thereafter, the prince's wedding was set to take place. Midas instructed the prince to escort his fiancée to the royal palace, while he stayed behind to discuss the details of the new kingdom with the king. It was on this journey that the prince's carriage was ambushed by Snow White, setting the stage for the events that followed. Previously, David confessed his feelings to Mary, but after unexpectedly regaining his memory, rejected her. Heartbroken, Mary turned to the doctor for muscle comfort, while Emma discovered that the sheriff was having an affair with Regina. Shocked by this revelation, Emma began avoiding him. The sheriff told her that his relationship with Regina was purely physical and devoid of any real emotion. To prove where his heart truly lay, the sheriff impulsively kissed Emma. During the tongue massage, he had a fleeting vision of a wolf. Before he could make sense of it, Emma had already walked away. Frustrated, the sheriff returned to Regina, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't recapture that strange vision. However, after their encounter, the sheriff dreamed of the same wolf again. He began to suspect that these were not just dreams, but memories, and decided to clear his head outside. The scene shifts to reveal the sheriff's true identity. In the fairy tale world, after Snow White's father died unexpectedly, the evil queen feigned grief while secretly rejoicing. In reality, she was the one who killed the king and now set her sights on eliminating Snow White. However, because Snow White was beloved by the people, the queen needed someone else to do her dirty work. The magic mirror suggested the perfect candidate, the huntsman who was the sheriff's past life. In the fairy tale world, the huntsman was so compassionate that he even shed tears for the animals he hunted. This was because after being abandoned by his parents, he was raised by wolves and lived with his beloved wolf companion as an adult. He cared more for animals than for people, especially when humans treated him or his wolf poorly. In such cases, he would kill without mercy. His cold-blooded nature made him the perfect choice for the queen. She summoned the huntsman and offered him wealth and power, but he only asked for one thing: for her to make hunting wolves illegal. This was an easy promise for the queen to keep, so the huntsman agreed to her terms. Disguised as a royal knight, the huntsman accompanied Snow White on a walk. However, Snow White sensed that something was wrong and deduced that the queen had sent him to kill her. Before the huntsman could strike, Snow White made the first move and fled. Strangely, she soon stopped to write a letter. Knowing she couldn't outrun the huntsman, she penned an apology to the queen, asking him to deliver it to her after she was killed, so she could die without regrets. The huntsman, curious, read the letter and was so moved that he freed Snow White and let her escape. To deceive the queen, he killed a deer and brought its heart back to her instead. But his good deed did not go unpunished. After reading Snow White's letter, the queen became enraged. She had once shared a secret with Snow White, who then betrayed her. Now, she wanted to place Snow White's heart in her collection, but when the storage chest didn't open automatically, she realized the huntsman had disobeyed her orders. To punish him, the queen ripped out his heart and placed it in the chest, making his life completely dependent on her. From then on, she forced him to become her permanent lover, a role that carried over into Storybrooke. Back in the present, the sheriff left Regina's house, only to be startled by the sight of his wolf companion. The next day, he went to the forest to investigate and found Mr. Gold tending to his garden. When the sheriff mentioned his search for the wolf, Mr. Gold hinted that the sheriff's dreams were actually memories from his past life, causing the sheriff to become even more suspicious. Soon after, the sheriff found his wolf, who clearly remembered him and approached him willingly. As he petted the wolf, memories of Snow White began to flood back. Confused, he went to Mary for answers. When he mentioned his past life, Mary casually brought up Henry's theory about the fairy tale world, and suddenly everything clicked for the sheriff. Realizing he was the huntsman and that the wolf was guiding him to find his heart, he immediately set out on his quest. Meanwhile, Emma, having heard that the sheriff wasn't feeling well, had been waiting for him at his office to take him home. However, the sheriff was determined to find his heart, and Emma had to work hard to convince him to rest. Just as they were talking, the wolf appeared again. Guided by the wolf, the sheriff and Emma discovered the secret chamber where the queen once stored hearts. Despite searching, they found nothing. Unfortunately, Regina arrived at the chamber's entrance. The sheriff decided to confront her, demanding an end to their affair. Although he insisted that Emma had nothing to do with it, Regina blamed her entirely. Their argument quickly escalated into a physical fight. After the scuffle, Regina realized she couldn't win the sheriff back, but was determined not to let Emma and the sheriff have a happy ending. She retreated to an underground passage where she kept the huntsman's heart, planning to destroy it. At the same time, the sheriff and Emma had solidified their relationship, sharing a smelly kiss as the sheriff's memories fully returned. But it was too late. Regina crushed his heart to dust, killing him instantly. Emma, unaware of what had just happened, could only cry out the sheriff's name, not understanding why he had suddenly collapsed. 2 weeks later, Mr. Gold summoned Emma to his shop to congratulate her in advance on becoming the new sheriff. Since the former sheriff had rented an apartment from Mr. Gold, he also handed over the sheriff's belongings to Emma. Among them, she found a walkie-talkie, which she intended to use to communicate with Henry. However, Henry was still upset. Although the sheriff's death was ruled natural, Henry knew Regina was the real killer, but felt powerless to bring her to justice. Overwhelmed with sadness, Henry decided to give up his fight against Regina. Mayor Regina, however, wasn't done with her schemes. She had no intention of allowing Emma to become sheriff and planned to use her mayoral authority to appoint the newspaper editor as the new sheriff and fire Emma. Though Emma was frustrated, she was ready to accept her fate. But just then, Mr. Gold stepped in to help. It turns out that according to Storybrooke's charter, Regina can only nominate a candidate, and the residents must vote to decide the sheriff. Armed with this knowledge, Emma confronted Regina the next day. Regina, cornered, had no choice but to agree to an open election between Emma and the editor. Regina wasn't easily outwitted. She realized that Mr. Gold was behind Emma's newfound confidence, but there was little she could do against him. Undeterred, Regina resorted to dirty tactics, having the editor publish a story about how Emma gave birth to Henry while in jail. Furious, Emma stormed into Regina's house to confront her, but in the midst of their argument, a fire broke out. Regina was injured by falling debris, but Emma heroically extinguished the flames and carried Regina to safety. This scene was captured by reporters, causing Emma's popularity to soar. However, she noticed some wool from Mr. Gold's pawn shop on the floor, realizing that he had started the fire. Mr. Gold had predicted that Emma would rescue Regina, making her the hero, but Emma didn't want to win the election through underhanded methods. She decided to come clean and publicly reveal that Mr. Gold had set the fire. She expected this honesty to cost her the election, but to her surprise, the townspeople overwhelmingly voted for her. This had been Mr. Gold's true intention all along. He knew that the residents feared him more than they feared Regina, and that Emma's courage in standing up to him would win their support. Mr. Gold's actions weren't purely out of goodwill. He knew that if Emma became sheriff, she would be in a position to repay the favor. Mr. Gold's transformation into the cunning mastermind he is today began long ago. Back then, Mr. Gold was just a common man living with his son, Balefire. His kingdom, embroiled in war, was aggressively conscripting soldiers, lowering the enlistment age to just 14. Royal knights roamed the land, taking boys and girls alike once they came of age. Any attempt to resist was met with brutal punishment from the dark wizard who served the kingdom. Unfortunately, Balefire was only 3 days away from turning 14, and Mr. Gold had to find a way to protect his son. Without any magical powers, his only option was to flee with Balefire under the cover of night. Along the way, they encountered an old beggar. Out of kindness, Mr. Gold gave him some of their meager savings, but soon after, they were surrounded by royal knights. Mr. Gold tried to lie, claiming they were on their way to the market, but the lead knight recognized him. Years earlier, Mr. Gold had deserted the battlefield, leading to the army's defeat. When he returned home, his wife, ashamed of his cowardice, left him. Mr. Gold had never told his son about this, but the knight mocked him for being a crippled coward. As if that wasn't enough, the knight demanded that Mr. Gold kiss his boot, or else he would take Balefire away. Humiliated and desperate, Mr. Gold complied, only to be kicked aside. After thoroughly humiliating him, the knight finally left, satisfied. The old beggar reappeared to help Mr. Gold back on his feet and offered him a way out. He revealed that the Duke of the Kingdom had enslaved the Dark Wizard using a magical dagger inscribed with the wizard's true name. If Mr. Gold could steal the dagger, he would become the wizard's new master. Alternatively, he could kill the wizard and take his dark powers. Though terrified by the idea, Mr. Gold knew he had to do something to protect Balefire. But Balefire believed that if the kingdom required him to fight, he should answer the call. Mr. Gold pointed out that the Duke only wanted to send 14-year-old children to the front lines as cannon fodder, and that obtaining the dagger was the only way to save them. That night, Mr. Gold and Balefire lit fires around the Duke's castle to create a distraction. Amid the chaos, Mr. Gold sneaked into the castle and easily retrieved the dagger, which bore the wizard's name. After sending Balefire home, Mr. Gold ventured deep into the forest and summoned the Dark Wizard by uttering his name. Just as the beggar had said, the wizard appeared, and Mr. Gold became his new master. The wizard then revealed a devastating truth. Balefire was not Mr. Gold's biological son, as his wife had betrayed him. Enraged, Mr. Gold killed the wizard in cold blood. To Mr. Gold's shock, the wizard was none other than the old beggar. The beggar had long been tormented by the cost of using dark magic and had wanted to be free of its curse. Seeing Mr. Gold's desperation to save his son, he manipulated events to ensure that Mr. Gold would take his place. With the beggar's death, Mr. Gold became the new Dark One, inheriting immense dark powers, along with the eternal curse that came with them. As his first act as the Dark One, Mr. Gold sought out Balefire and exacted revenge on the knights who had humiliated him, killing them effortlessly. Under the influence of dark magic, Mr. Gold became increasingly cold and ruthless, and his appearance grew more frightening with each passing day. The flashback ends and the scene shifts to Henry reading a comic book when a girl named Ava approached him and struck up a conversation. Unfortunately, this wasn't a stroke of good luck for Henry, but rather a setup. Ava distracted him so her younger brother could slip some merchandise into Henry's backpack. The store manager quickly noticed the theft, and Henry got blamed for it. Regina arrived soon after and recognized that Ava and her brother were the real culprits. After all, she had orchestrated their fate herself. This story traces back to the fairy tale world. One day, Ava's father was chopping wood to prepare for the coming winter, and Ava and her brother were helping by gathering branches. To prevent them from getting lost, their father gave Ava a compass. But when the siblings returned, their father was nowhere to be found. Frantic, Ava and her brother searched for him, but instead stumbled upon the evil queen's guards, damaging the compass in the process. The queen, hearing of their plight, showed no pity and ordered her soldiers to capture them. However, Ava bravely fought back, though she and her brother were eventually captured. The queen was impressed by Ava's courage and decided not to harm them, but instead asked them to do her a favor, promising to help them find their father afterward. Of course, this favor was no small task. It turns out the queen wanted an item from the blind witch who lived in a gingerbread house protected by magic that only children could bypass. Ava and her brother were tasked with sneaking in while the witch slept and stealing a small black pouch. They were warned not to eat anything in the house. As night fell, they entered the gingerbread house, which was filled with irresistible treats. Ava remained focused on the mission, determined to reunite with her father, but her brother couldn't resist and took a bite of a cake, waking the blind witch. The siblings were trapped, on the brink of becoming the witch's next meal. In a crucial moment, Ava took charge, not only helping her brother escape, but also pushing the witch into the oven and escaping with the black pouch. Watching through her magic mirror, the queen finished off the witch. Ava and her brother returned with the pouch, which contained the poisoned apple. The queen was pleased, but as always broke her promise. She claimed that their father had abandoned them and offered them a place in her castle instead. But clever Ava didn't believe her bullshit and insisted on finding their father. Enraged, the queen cast a spell, sending them into the enchanted forest. Without magic, they had no hope of escaping the vast forest. As for their father, he hadn't abandoned them. He had been captured by the queen while chopping wood. Knowing they would never reunite, the queen released him to suffer the torment of losing his children. Back in the present, Regina left Emma to deal with this mess. Ava explained that they were poor and only stole out of necessity, which moved Emma. She decided to take the siblings home, but upon arriving, Ava asked Emma not to meet her parents. This raised Emma's suspicions, and she soon discovered that the house wasn't theirs. The siblings were living in a basement. After some investigation, Emma learned that their mother had died years ago, and they had been fending for themselves ever since. Faced with this situation, Emma was reluctant to send them to foster care, knowing from her own experience how miserable it could be. Instead, she decided to track down their missing father. Meanwhile, Regina intervened again, pointing out that there were no records of their father in town. She had already contacted the relevant authorities to place the siblings in separate foster homes in Boston, a task she assigned to Emma. At this crucial moment, Henry stepped in to help. He suggested that the fairy tale characters couldn't leave Storybrooke, meaning their father must still be in town. This made Henry curious about his own father's story, prompting his biological mother, Emma, to open up. She shared that she had fallen in love with a trainee firefighter while working as a waitress, but their relationship ended abruptly when she was imprisoned, only realizing she was pregnant afterward. To make matters worse, the firefighter died in the line of duty. Henry, hearing this, asked for a keepsake from his father, but Emma had nothing to give. However, this inspired her to ask Ava and her brother for something that belonged to their father. Just like in the fairy tale, all Ava had was a compass. With no other options, Emma sought help from Mr. Gold, who recognized the compass as something from his shop. He quickly found the customer's name, and with this information, Emma tracked down the siblings' father, who had been reincarnated as a mechanic. But in this timeline, the mechanic was unwilling to take responsibility. Emma was deeply disappointed but chose not to tell the siblings the truth, just as she had lied to Henry about his father being a hero. As Emma wrestled with her conscience, Regina pressured her to send the siblings away. Reluctantly, Emma agreed. However, due to the curse, her police car broke down halfway, giving her an excuse to call the mechanic. She wanted him to see his children with his own eyes. From an outside perspective, this move effectively thwarted the Queen's scheme. In the end, the mechanic decided to take in his children, allowing the family to reunite in Storybrooke. After everything settled down, Emma and Henry made a surprising discovery. A mysterious man had ridden into Storybrooke on a motorcycle and planned to stay. This was shocking, as no one had been able to enter or leave Storybrooke before Emma's arrival. Naturally, Henry was intrigued. The next day, he approached the man with questions, but the man refused to say much. Coincidentally, Regina witnessed the encounter. Meanwhile, Mary was in a rush to leave, which puzzled Emma. Mary explained that she needed to help her students with a science project. However, after some time, Mary was seen tidying up at the diner and pretending to read a book. Almost at the same time, David walked into the diner. He had found a job at the animal shelter. The two exchanged brief pleasantries rather than hormones, unaware that Emma had followed them. Realizing she had been caught, Mary confessed that she had been tracking David's movements and waited for him every day at the same time, just to see him buy coffee. Her efforts mirrored the complicated path their relationship took in the fairy tale world. Back then, a month had passed since Snow White and Prince Charming first met. Red Riding Hood, whose past life was the diner waitress Ruby, informed Snow White that Prince Charming's wedding was fast approaching, but Snow White couldn't forget him. Red Riding Hood mentioned a powerful individual who could grant her any wish. Naturally, this person was Rumple. He quickly brewed a potion specifically designed to make her forget Prince Charming, but strangely, all he asked for in return was a single strand of her hair. Meanwhile, in the castle, Prince Charming was miserable. The king had already noticed that his heart belonged to someone else and ordered him to forget her and proceed with the wedding. With nothing left to lose, the prince sent a message to Snow White, promising that if she came to him, he would leave everything behind and run away with her. Overjoyed by the letter, Snow White disguised herself as a flower delivery girl and sneaked into the castle. However, before she could meet the prince, she was caught by the guards and thrown into the dungeon. Her attempts to escape failed, and a fellow prisoner, a dwarf named Grumpy, advised her to give up. As they talked, Snow White learned that Grumpy used to work in a diamond mine. He had spent all his savings on a diamond to propose to his love, only to discover it was stolen property, leading to his imprisonment. As they continued to talk, Grumpy's fellow dwarfs arrived to rescue him. Feeling sympathy for Snow White, who shared his misfortune, Grumpy decided to help her escape as well. However, midway through their escape, the group disagreed on which route to take. The dwarfs didn't trust Snow White's experience and chose to flee through the courtyard, where they were immediately caught. Grumpy's companion was killed by an arrow, and the king threatened to kill Grumpy unless he handed over Snow White. In a brave move, Snow White offered her life in exchange for Grumpy's. The king, who had no real interest in killing Grumpy, agreed and let him go. He spared Snow White's life too, but only because her death would fuel the prince's rebellion. Instead, he ordered her to tell the prince that she had no feelings for him, or the prince would be killed. Tearfully, Snow White complied, severing her relationship with the prince. After completing her task, the king released Snow White, but she was devastated. The remaining 7 dwarfs were there to comfort her. Heartbroken, Snow White decided to drink the potion Rumple gave her to erase her memories of the prince. But Grumpy intervened, telling her that pain is a part of life and shouldn't be avoided. The next day, the prince called off his wedding and fled the castle to search for Snow White. The news spread quickly across the kingdom, and Grumpy rushed to tell her, only to find that Snow White had already drunk the potion and forgotten the prince entirely. Back in the present, Mary ran into David's wife at the grocery store and noticed she was buying a pregnancy test, which crushed her spirits. Regina took the opportunity to remind Mary to stay away from David, but some things are destined. While out later, Mary found an injured dove and took it to the animal shelter. The dove wasn't seriously hurt, but it was a rare breed that would be lonely forever if it didn't return to its flock soon. With a storm approaching, Mary decided to release the dove herself and declined David's help. However, she didn't manage to release the dove and nearly fell off a cliff. David arrived just in time to save her shitty life. As the storm hit, they took shelter in a cabin, giving them a chance to talk. Mary admitted she still had feelings for him, and David confessed that he came to the diner every day just to see her and that he wasn't ready to have children. Before they could finish their conversation, the storm passed, and Mary hurried to release the dove, successfully reuniting it with its flock. David, however, persisted, even admitting that while he chose his wife, he was still in love with Mary. But Mary decided to cut ties for good. The next day, David didn't show up at the diner, and his wife told him she wasn't pregnant. Mary stayed home, but neither of them anticipated that they would accidentally meet again. This was no mere coincidence, and with the news that David's wife wasn't pregnant, they couldn't resist any longer and kissed in public, much to Regina's fury. Meanwhile, Emma heard that the mysterious man had initiated a conversation with Henry, so she went to question him. However, the man remained unfazed, claiming to be a writer who had come to Storybrooke to find inspiration for his work. Emma was naturally skeptical of his story. Due to the storm from the previous day, Henry's secret castle was damaged, but the fairy tale book buried underground remained intact. However, Regina somehow caught wind of the secret location and arrived, fully exposing the hidden spot to her. Emma was deeply puzzled by this, but had no way to investigate. Unexpectedly, the editor of the town's newspaper approached Emma with a proposal to expose Regina's true nature. After losing the sheriff's election, he had a falling out with Regina and was subsequently fired from the paper. Now he was desperate to find dirt on her. Emma didn't immediately accept his offer, choosing instead to think it over. This editor is also a character from the fairy tale world. Though he appears unremarkable, he is actually the genie from the lamp. One day, the genie was summoned again, and the summoner was none other than Snow White's father, King Leopold. However, the king lived a life of luxury and couldn't think of a wish. Upon learning that the genie was trapped in the lamp, the king wished for the genie's freedom and even gave him the remaining wishes. But the genie, knowing that every wish comes with a price, decided never to use those wishes. After gaining his freedom, the genie sought to find true love. The king, hearing this, brought the genie back to his castle to meet his daughter and wife. Little did anyone know that the genie would fall in love with the evil queen at first sight. Not long after, King Leopold's birthday arrived and everyone gathered at the castle to celebrate. During the festivities, the king's thoughts were consumed by Snow White and her late mother, leaving the evil queen feeling like an outsider. Only the genie noticed her departure and followed her, offering a mirror as a token of his affection. Soon after, the king discovered from the queen's diary that she had been unfaithful. Although the queen hadn't explicitly mentioned the genie, the king ordered the genie to investigate and find the queen's hidden lover. Faced with the task of investigating himself, the genie reluctantly accepted. His first thought was to consult the queen, but she had already been placed under house arrest. It was then that the queen's father sneaked into the castle and gave the genie a box, claiming that it contained something that could set the queen free. Curious, the genie opened the box, only to find 2 poisonous snakes from his homeland. Just one bite was fatal. The queen, seeing this, bid the genie farewell and prepared to end her life like Cleopatra. Determined to protect the woman he loved, the genie decided to take a risk and use the snakes to assassinate King Leopold, thus securing the queen's freedom. Before long, the genie found the king asleep and used the snakes to end his life. As the king lay dying, the genie confessed his affair with the queen, ensuring that the king understood. In his final moments, King Leopold realized that the wish he had granted the genie had come at a great cost. However, the genie's hopes for a happy ending were also dashed. The queen revealed that the castle guards had discovered the snakes, and it was only a matter of time before his crime was exposed. The best she could do was arrange for the genie to flee on a ship. It was then that the genie realized the queen had chosen the snakes from his homeland to frame him as a scapegoat. He had been nothing more than a pawn in her game. The queen, seeing no need to hide her intentions any longer, admitted that she had never loved him. Heartbroken, the genie used one of his remaining wishes to stay by her side forever, only to find himself trapped in the mirror, becoming the queen's magic mirror. Back in the present, Henry and Emma discovered that Regina had demolished the secret castle, and the fairy tale book was missing. Regina even taunted Emma, who could no longer tolerate her actions and decided to team up with the editor. According to his investigation, Regina had secretly siphoned $50,000 from public funds, but he had yet to determine where the money had gone. He suggested using underhanded tactics like wiretapping and surveillance to find out. However, Emma wanted to investigate openly and honestly, but the paper trail revealed nothing, leaving Emma with no choice but to follow the editor's advice. Together, they confronted Regina about the missing funds, but she refused to divulge any information. While Emma didn't press further, she had already secretly planted a listening device under Regina's desk. The next day, Emma and the editor learned that Regina planned to meet someone in the forest that night, bringing cash along. Naturally, they decided to follow her. However, midway through, the brakes on their police car suddenly failed. Fortunately, no one was injured, but they had to continue on foot. Unexpectedly, Mr. Gold appeared and revealed that Regina was meeting him for a transaction. She wanted to purchase the land beneath his feet, but he refused to disclose her intentions for the property. Determined to uncover the truth, Emma took a risk and broke into Regina's office, secretly photocopying documents related to the land purchase. When Regina arrived, Emma quickly covered by claiming that some kids had thrown rocks and broken the glass door, barely managing to bluff her way out. The next day, after reviewing the documents, Emma and the editor deduced that Regina was secretly planning to build a mansion. However, Emma felt uneasy, knowing the evidence was obtained illegally. The editor then revealed that Regina had previously assigned him to spy on Emma and Henry, which was how Henry's secret castle was exposed. With this new information, Emma resolved to take down Regina. Conveniently, a town meeting was scheduled, and the two rushed to confront Regina with the documents. But despite their meticulous planning, they overlooked a crucial detail. Regina admitted to all the residents that she had diverted funds to build a playhouse in the forest for the town's children. This encounter was a significant defeat for Emma. To make matters worse, Regina had already discovered that Emma had broken into her office. Armed with this leverage, she warned Emma that she was now forbidden from seeing Henry without her permission. It turns out that the editor was a mole planted by Regina. He had not only fed her information but also sabotaged the brakes on Emma's car. Unaware of the betrayal, Emma was in for more setbacks. The next day, Mr. Gold sent someone to repossess a florist's truck after he failed to pay his debts. Regina then approached Mr. Gold to negotiate a deal, but he dismissed her. Meanwhile, Emma and Mary ran into Ashley at the diner, who was now a mother. The three hadn't seen each other in a while, so they caught up. It was Valentine's Day, and Ruby suggested they go to a bar that night. However, Emma was suddenly called to respond to a burglary. Someone had broken into Mr. Gold's house. Mr. Gold quickly deduced that the florist was behind it. Although Emma recovered the stolen items, the florist managed to evade capture. Mr. Gold pointed out that the most valuable item was still missing. He didn't trust Emma to find it, so he took matters into his own hands. He tracked down the florist and interrogated him in a secluded room. The florist was nearly beaten to death before Emma arrived just in time to stop Mr. Gold. Since he refused to explain why he was so furious, Emma had no choice but to detain him temporarily. Meanwhile, at the bar, Ashley's boyfriend unexpectedly proposed, giving them a happy ending in the Storybrooke timeline. In contrast, Mary was having a much worse day. Although David gave her a Valentine's Day card, it was addressed to his wife, Catherine. David had bought 2 cards, and seeing him so casually juggling both relationships, Mary lost all desire to celebrate. The next day, Regina visited the police station and sent Emma away on an errand with Henry. She confronted Mr. Gold, demanding to know his real name before she would return his precious item. It was clear she knew that Mr. Gold retained his memories from the fairy tale world. With nothing left to hide, Mr. Gold admitted he was Rumple. Regina then produced a chipped cup, and the two finally revealed their true identities to each other. But to understand why Mr. Gold treasured a chipped cup so dearly, we must go back to the fairy tale world. At that time, a kingdom was on the brink of being overrun by ogres. Desperate, the king, who in Storybrooke is the florist, sought help from Rumple. For Rumple, dealing with ogres was easy, but he was after something else: the king's newly married daughter, Belle. However, he didn't want her as a wife, he just needed her as a maid. The king was outraged and ordered Rumple to leave, but Belle agreed to go with him, willing to sacrifice her happiness for the kingdom. Rumple was overjoyed and took Belle back to his castle, where he prepared a dungeon as her new room. Soon, Belle began serving him, and although Rumple had no particular demands, he did enjoy teasing her. One day, Belle broke a cup while frightened by one of his jokes, but Rumple didn't mind. In fact, at this stage, Rumple still had some humanity left, and the two grew closer, eventually developing feelings for each other. Over the course of a few months, Belle noticed that Rumple kept children's clothes at home and asked him about it. This touched a sensitive spot for him, and he confessed that he had lost his son. Belle, in turn, opened up about her own life, revealing that her engagement was merely a political arrangement devoid of any real affection. Deep down, she longed to find true love. This was the first time Rumple had ever had such an honest conversation with anyone, and as a gesture of trust, he sent Belle to the village to buy some straw, essentially granting her a form of freedom. On her way, Belle encountered the evil queen's convoy. The queen immediately recognized that Belle had fallen in love with Rumple. However, Belle believed that Rumple's heart had been consumed by darkness and felt she had no choice but to leave him. The queen then told Belle that true love is the most powerful magic in the world, and with a kiss of true love, she could turn Rumple back into a mortal. Motivated by this, Belle returned to the castle to save him. Rumple was overjoyed to see her again, and Belle wasted no time kissing him to break the curse. Just as the queen had said, Rumple's dark powers began to wane. But instead of rejoicing, Rumple became paranoid, convinced that Belle was conspiring with the queen to kill him. He believed no one could ever truly love him. In a fit of rage, he locked Belle back in the dungeon and smashed everything in sight. Everything except the chipped cup that Belle had broken earlier. After calming down, Rumple bitterly ordered Belle to leave the castle. Before she left, Belle called him a coward, accusing him of being too afraid to change, too scared of losing his power, and too unwilling to believe that someone could genuinely care for him. She warned him that he would regret this decision someday. Sometime later, the evil queen visited Rumple and told him what had become of Belle. When she returned home, her father locked her in a tower as punishment for her association with Rumple. She was subjected to constant torment until she couldn't bear it anymore and jumped to her death. Rumple was devastated by the news, but all he could do was cling to the chipped cup as a keepsake. However, in the Storybrooke timeline, Belle was not dead. The queen, now Regina, had imprisoned her in the hospital's basement, keeping her as a trump card against Mr. Gold. Meanwhile, Mary was furious with David for continuing to string along both her and his wife, causing further strain in their relationship. The scene shifts to show Prince Charming's escape from his arranged marriage. At that time, Catherine had already arrived in the kingdom to fulfill the marriage contract. The old king, terrified to admit that his son had fled, ordered his men to capture him immediately. Meanwhile, the prince narrowly escaped the king's soldiers by staging a daring getaway on horseback. But as he lay in hiding, he was captured by another group, Catherine's own men. It turned out Catherine was fully aware of the situation but wasn't upset. In fact, she helped the prince escape to her own territory. The reason was simple. Catherine also had no desire to marry the prince. Like him, she had once loved someone deeply but had lost that person. Years earlier, while accompanying King Midas on a journey, Catherine's fiancé had died protecting the king from an ambush. He had accidentally touched Midas's hand and was turned into gold. Because gold blocks magical energy, even true love's kiss couldn't break the curse. The only solution was to use water from a magical lake, which was guarded by a fearsome water nymph. Many brave souls had tried to retrieve the water, but all had perished in the attempt. Undeterred, the prince decided to take on the challenge himself, relying on his luck. However, the monster guarding the lake turned out to be a sexy woman who could shapeshift into anyone's heart's desire. This explained why previous warriors had met their doom. They were lured in by her sexy transformations. Despite knowing better, the prince was momentarily captivated when the nymph took on Snow White's appearance. But just as he was about to give in, he snapped back to his senses. The nymph, realizing her ruse had failed, dragged the prince into the lake, intending to drown him. In the nick of time, the prince spotted a dagger on the lake bed. Taking advantage of the nymph's distraction, he stabbed her without hormone mercy, ending her sexy life. The rest unfolded like a classic fairy tale. The prince retrieved the lake water, Catherine used it to restore her fiancé, and after witnessing their happy reunion, the prince resumed his quest to find Snow White. The next day, Red Riding Hood informed the prince that Snow White had tried to stop his wedding by coming to the castle, making him realize that the old king had been behind their separation all along. Before they could discuss further, the king's men caught up with them, forcing the prince and Red to flee together. Back in Storybrooke, Catherine told David over dinner that she had applied to law school in Boston and wanted them to move there together. This unexpected news caught David off guard, and he immediately ran to tell Mary. At this point, Mary insisted that David tell Catherine the whole truth to avoid making things worse. However, David once again took the cowardly route, telling Catherine that he couldn't go to Boston with her because of certain reasons, but failing to confess his affair with Mary. Meanwhile, because Henry had lost his fairy tale book, Regina bought him a video game console to cheer him up. Both believed the book was lost for good, but in reality, the mysterious writer had taken it and was in the process of restoring it. Heartbroken, Catherine later confided in Regina, who casually revealed that Mary was involved. Shocked and unable to process the revelation, Catherine lashed out at Regina for keeping it from her. David then called Mary with what he thought was good news, but just as they hung up, Catherine stormed into the school, slapped Mary in her greasy face, and accused her of being a homewrecker. Only then did Mary realize that David had once again taken the coward's way out. Before long, the whole town knew about the affair, and Mary was publicly shamed as the other woman. David tried to justify his actions by claiming he didn't want to hurt Catherine. Unable to tolerate his behavior, Mary decided to sever ties with him for good. Elsewhere, the writer approached Emma and invited her to a special place. However, Emma was surprised to find that the special place he mentioned was just an old well. But this wasn't an ordinary well. According to legend, the water within it came from an underground, magical lake, and drinking from it could help one recover something they had lost. This well was known as the Wishing Well. Although the writer's tale intrigued her, Emma remained skeptical about the existence of magic. After returning to town, Emma discovered Henry's storybook under her car. It didn't take long for her to realize that the writer was behind this. Without overthinking it, she handed the book back to Henry. Meanwhile, Catherine approached Regina to apologize and revealed that she had accepted the reality that David and Mary were truly in love. Realizing that David was not her destined true love, Catherine decided to let go and move to Boston as planned, leaving behind a letter encouraging David to be with Mary. This was the last thing Regina wanted, so she snuck into Catherine's house, stole the letter, and burned it. As for Catherine herself, she never made it out of Storybrooke. A man later found her car abandoned by the roadside, but Catherine was nowhere to be found. This man was, in fact, her true love from the fairy tale world. The next day, as the town prepared for Miners' Day, the nuns continued their tradition of selling candles. Mary encouraged the townsfolk to volunteer for the sale, but because of her reputation as the other woman, no one responded. Emma noticed her distress and tried to comfort her, but their conversation was cut short by a call, telling that Catherine had gone missing, and naturally, David became the prime suspect. David insisted he hadn't seen or spoken to Catherine, but Regina produced phone records showing that he had called her an hour before the car crash. This new information made the case even more mysterious. Elsewhere, Miner's Day proceeded as planned. Grumpy's counterpart in Storybrooke was passing by when a nun accidentally spilled gold dust all over him. Instead of getting angry, he helped her fix a light bulb, and a spark ignited between them. In typical Storybrooke fashion, their connection was no coincidence. Their bond, like others in the town, had roots in their past lives. Grumpy's story with the nun began in the fairy tale world, where she was once a fairy, mentored by the Blue Fairy. As a fairy, she had to complete several years of pixie dust collection before she could become a fairy godmother. However, her clumsiness led her to spill some pixie dust, which found its way into a dwarf egg, eventually leading to Grumpy's birth. From that moment, Grumpy had faint memories of the fairy, but others dismissed his claims, saying there were no female dwarfs in their world. Dwarfs were born to work in the diamond mines, each with a custom-made pickaxe and a unique name that reflected their character. Their job was to refine diamonds into pixie dust. Grumpy and his 7 brothers soon began their laborious work. Time passed quickly, and before they knew it, it was time for the fairies to collect the pixie dust. By chance, Grumpy finally met the fairy he remembered. In a heroic moment, he saved the almost burned pixie dust, earning her admiration. The fairy hinted that she wanted to watch the fireflies on the mountain that night, hoping Grumpy would join her. But being a bit clueless, Grumpy didn't catch on and assumed she wasn't interested in him, leaving him feeling down. Belle, who was staying with the dwarfs at the time, noticed Grumpy's sadness and helped him realize what was happening. Understanding dawned on him, and he rushed to the mountain to meet the fairy. That night, under the glow of fireflies, they shared a smelly kiss and promised to run away together the next evening to explore the world. The next night, Grumpy packed his things and prepared to leave the mine, with his brothers offering their best wishes. However, the foreman reminded him that dwarfs were destined to be loveless and bound to work for life. The Blue Fairy also appeared, warning Grumpy that if they ran away together, the fairy would lose her wings. If Grumpy let her go, she could fulfill her dream of becoming a fairy godmother. This gave Grumpy pause, and when he met the fairy, who had already prepared a manual Tesla boat for their escape, he heartbreakingly rejected her. Despite her pleas, Grumpy stood firm, choosing to view their love as a fleeting dream. After the dream ended, he returned to his life as a diligent dwarf. However, even though he pretended everything was normal, his pickaxe broke in his hands. When he received a new pickaxe, his name changed from Dreamy to Grumpy. In the present day, the Blue Fairy, now the head nun, remained the fairy's superior. Due to a recent mistake, the nuns faced a 5,000 expense they couldn't cover, threatening their ability to pay the rent. The Blue Fairy tasked a nun with finding a way to raise the money, which meant she needed to sell 1,000 candles. But Mr. Gold, as their landlord, was unforgiving. If they failed to pay, the nuns would be forced to leave Storybrooke. Grumpy confidently vowed to sell all the candles, leaving Mary astonished. But despite his bold words, he and Mary struggled to sell even a single candle. This was partly because of Mary's tarnished reputation, and partly due to Grumpy's inherited bad temper, which made the townsfolk avoid him. Even when Grumpy tried a new approach by personally pitching the candles to the residents, no one was interested. Despite this, Grumpy didn't reveal the truth to the nun and insisted that all the candles had been sold. The nun, believing him, gave Grumpy a big hug, leaving Mary fuming. Grumpy, however, remained adamant that he would find a way, and it became clear to Mary that Grumpy had feelings for the nun. Determined to help the woman he loved, Grumpy decided to sell his beloved Tesla boat to Mr. Gold in exchange for a month's rent for the nuns. But Mr. Gold flatly refused, revealing that he held a grudge against the nun and would never do such a deal. Frustrated, Grumpy was surprised when the nun visited him with food to express her gratitude, bringing them closer and mending the regrets of their past lives. However, the moment was short-lived when the nun discovered the candles hidden on the boat. Realizing he had been caught, Grumpy confessed everything. Though the nun didn't scold him, she left disheartened. That evening, Grumpy and Mary sat together, drowning their sorrows in alcohol. After a few drinks, Grumpy came up with one last desperate plan. He used his pickaxe to break into the electrical box, causing a town-wide blackout. With the town in darkness, the demand for candles skyrocketed, and they managed to sell all 1,000 candles. Grumpy finally had the confidence to face the nun and proudly report their success. Meanwhile, Regina confronted Emma, who was still poring over the phone records, demanding that she take action against David. Reluctantly, Emma had no choice but to bring David in, escorting him to the police car in full view of the town. However, with no substantial evidence, Emma couldn't hold David and released him after a brief questioning. Meanwhile, at the diner, Ruby was engrossed in a conversation with the writer. Inspired by his tales of adventure, Ruby expressed her desire to travel the world, but her grandmother wanted her to stay in Storybrooke and take over the diner. Their disagreement escalated into a heated argument, and in her frustration, Ruby quit her job. Coincidentally, Ruby faced similar restrictions in the fairy tale world. Back then, as Red Riding Hood, she was in love with a man, but her grandmother forbade her from going out at night, fearing the big bad wolf that roamed the woods, threatening both people and livestock. The villagers planned to form a hunting party to kill the wolf, but Red's grandmother insisted that she wear her red cloak and stay home, not even allowing her to keep watch. The next morning, Red was finally allowed to go out and gather eggs, where she unexpectedly met Snow White. Snow had recently escaped the castle and was hiding in the coop, relying on stolen eggs for survival. Red, unfazed, invited Snow to fetch water with her, but on their way, they discovered several hunters who had been brutally killed by the wolf. To avenge their fallen comrades, the villagers decided to go on a full-scale hunt that night, vowing to kill the wolf. But Red's grandmother opposed the plan, recounting how she had once seen the wolf as a child. Her father and 6 brothers had fought the wolf together, but all 7 were torn apart with ease. The wolf even knocked her off the roof where she had been hiding, leaving her with a bite mark on her hand before walking away. Despite her grandmother's warnings, Red believed the wolf was the reason she couldn't be with her lover, and decided to take matters into her own hands. She planned to attack the wolf during the day while it slept. Red and Snow followed the wolf's tracks, but were shocked to find that the prints gradually changed from paw prints to boot prints, eventually becoming human footprints. This revelation meant they were dealing with a werewolf, not just a wolf. Even more startling, the footprints led straight to Red's cabin, where only the hunter had been the previous night and participated in the village hunt for the first time. The truth became increasingly clear. After some consideration, Red decided to confront the hunter. To prevent any further violence or unnecessary deaths, the hunter asked Red to chain him to a tree during the night, and she agreed to stay by his side. That night, Snow White donned the red cloak and posed as Red Riding Hood in bed, but it didn't take long for her to be discovered by the granny. Snow White had to confess, but unexpectedly, she learned that Red Riding Hood was the real werewolf. The granny explained that the wolf she encountered as a child was actually Red's grandfather, who later returned to transform her into a wolf as well. The curse had been passed down through generations. Red's mother had died at the hands of a hunting party, and to prevent Red from transforming, the granny had bought a magical red cloak from a sorcerer. But Red had not only taken off the cloak, she had also snuck out of the house. Luckily, the granny's senses hadn't dulled with age. She tracked down the transformed Red and subdued her with a silver arrow. Snow White hurriedly draped the red cloak over Red, but they were too late. Red had already torn the hunter to onion pieces. In a flash, Red transformed back into her human form, realizing for the first time that she was a werewolf. The hunting party soon arrived, and to protect Red, the granny instructed Snow White to take her away while she stayed behind to deal with the villagers. Back in Storybrooke, Emma and Mary discussed the ongoing investigation. Although they hadn't made any significant progress beyond confirming Catherine's disappearance, the affair between David and Mary made them prime suspects. As fate would have it, they ran into Ruby, who, after a fight with her granny, was now homeless and unsure of where to go. Emma invited Ruby to stay with Mary. The next day, Mary set out alone to search for Catherine and ran into David, who was wandering around looking for his wife. But David seemed dazed and confused, almost as if he were under a spell. Meanwhile, Ruby, with nothing else to do, answered a call at the station. Emma decided to give Ruby a job answering phones. Soon after, Mary told Emma that something seemed off about David. Hearing this, Henry suggested they ask Ruby for help. With her werewolf senses, Ruby tracked down the unconscious David. Thankfully, David was now fully aware, but he had no memory of anything that happened after leaving Emma's office. The doctor noted that this was eerily similar to how David acted when he first woke up from his coma. This raised the possibility that David might have unknowingly harmed Catherine. With suspicion growing, Regina pressured Emma to expedite the investigation. Emma asked Ruby to search the woods again, and using her abilities, Ruby unearthed a wooden box. What was inside shocked her. Though Ruby's efforts were commendable, she realized she wasn't cut out for this kind of investigative work and decided to return to her granny. The two made amends. In contrast, David and Mary were in deep trouble. The box contained a human heart, and while the tests were still pending, Emma found Mary's fingerprints inside the box. This shocking discovery left Emma with no choice but to take Mary to the station for questioning. Naturally, Regina inserted herself into the situation, noting that the box Ruby found was actually Mary's jewelry box. Regina used this opportunity to manipulate Mary into confessing. Mary almost fell for it, but Emma stepped in just in time, pulling Regina aside for a private conversation. Regina suggested that Emma check Mary's home for signs of a break-in. Desperate to prove Mary's innocence, Emma agreed. Henry, seeing Emma's predicament, pointed out that Regina might be the one who broke in. But instead of finding any evidence of a break-in, Emma discovered a hunting knife hidden in the basement. This left Mary in an even worse position, with no way to clear her name. Devastated, Henry isolated himself at the diner. There, the writer, almost as if he had read the script, told Henry that everything in the fairy tale book was real and urged him to look for answers in its pages. Meanwhile, seeing the situation grow more dire, Mr. Gold offered to represent Mary as her defense attorney, free of charge. With no other options, she accepted his help. After reading the fairy tale book, Henry learned that the evil queen possessed a key that could open any door. So he managed to steal Regina's keyring from her office, and after several attempts, found a key that opened Mary's door. At the same time, David asked Dr. Hopper to hypnotize him, hoping to recover his memories from the blackout. But instead, David began to recall memories from his past life. The scene shifts to Prince Charming and Red Riding Hood still on the run from King George's men. That night was a full moon, and Red urged the prince to find Snow White, while she transformed into a wolf to buy him some time. Meanwhile, Snow White, after drinking the forgetting potion, not only forgot about Prince Charming but also became irritable and harsh towards others. The dwarves, desperate to restore her to her old self, called on Jiminy Cricket for help. After talking with him, Snow White realized that the root of all her problems was the evil queen. Deciding that only the person who cursed her could break it, Snow White armed herself and set out to assassinate the queen. The saying, "Revenge strengthens resolve," proved true as Snow White quickly captured one of the queen's knights and forced him to reveal the queen's location. She knocked him out and disguised herself as a knight to infiltrate the castle. However, Grumpy, unable to stand by and watch Snow White throw her life away, suggested they seek help from Rumple instead. Snow White agreed, remembering Rumple's immense power. The next day, Prince Charming ran into a knight and learned of Snow White's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Grumpy and Snow White arrived at Rumple's castle. However, Rumple revealed that true love was the only magic he had yet to harness, meaning he couldn't help Snow White. But he did offer to kill the evil queen for her. He handed Snow White a magical bow and arrow, instructing her to ambush the queen on her way out of the palace. Strangely, this time, Rumple didn't ask for a single strand of hair in return, letting Snow White take the bow and arrow for free. Moments later, Prince Charming arrived at Rumple's castle. When questioned by the prince, Rumple remained calm and pointed out that a true love's kiss could break the spell of the forgetting potion. He then offered to reveal Snow White's whereabouts in exchange for the prince's cloak. Although the deal seemed odd, the prince didn't think twice and handed over the cloak. Rumple immediately fulfilled his promise and warned the prince that if Snow White killed the evil queen, she would become even more evil herself. Alarmed, the prince set off at once, while Rumple collected a strand of the prince's hair from the cloak and intertwined it with Snow White's hair, creating a powerful, true love potion. At last, Rumple had the final ingredient he needed for the most potent of magical elixirs. Before long, Prince Charming found Snow White and attempted to break the spell with a passionate but smelly kiss. However, because Snow White didn't remember him, the kiss had no effect. In fact, the prince received a punch in the face for his efforts and was tied to a tree by Snow White. Despite his best efforts to persuade her not to kill the evil queen, Snow White remained determined. Fortunately, Jiminy Cricket arrived just in time, helping the prince escape his bonds and advising him that he needed to help Snow White remember who she truly was. Soon after, as predicted by Rumple, the evil queen's Ferrari carriage appeared on the forest path. Overjoyed, Snow White readied her bow and aimed to kill the queen. But at the last moment, the prince stepped into the arrow's path, taking the hit and confessing his love in a heartfelt speech. Moved to tears, Snow White finally remembered everything about their love. The two shared a tongue massage that broke the spell, but their joy was short-lived. King George's soldiers soon arrived and arrested the prince, leaving Snow White to return to the dwarves, apologize, and prepare to rescue him. Seeing that Snow White had returned to her true self, the dwarves vowed to help her. Back in Storybrooke, David recalled the moment when the darkened Snow White was intent on killing the evil queen. He mistakenly believed that Mary had actually killed his wife, Catherine. Afraid to admit this to Dr. Hopper, he rushed to tell Mary. Disappointed, Mary chastised David for doubting her, pointing out that she had always believed in his innocence. Hurt and frustrated, she kicked his stinky butt out. The next day, Mary found a key under her bed which could unlock her cell. Before she could think it through, Emma arrived with bad news. The heart had been confirmed to belong to Catherine, meaning that Mary was about to be charged with murder. Desperate, Emma sought Mr. Gold's help, vowing to do whatever it took to clear Mary's name. However, Mary chose that moment to escape from the cell. Emma and Mr. Gold quickly discovered Mary's escape. Henry initially thought they had orchestrated the jailbreak, but it was far from a good thing. With her trial scheduled for the next morning, Mary was now a fugitive, and whether innocent or guilty, she would face serious charges. Emma knew time was of the essence and set out to find her. On the way, she nearly hit a man with her car. Fortunately, she stopped in time, though the man appeared to have twisted his ankle. Feeling guilty, Emma offered to drive him home. The man turned out to be the Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. In the fairy tale world, the Mad Hatter lived happily with his daughter until the evil queen paid him a visit. Knowing she was up to no good, he quickly hid his daughter in the woods before confronting the queen. The two were old acquaintances, and the queen wasted no time, asking him to take her somewhere to retrieve an item. But the Hatter had retired and refused, even when the queen offered him a generous reward. Surprisingly, the queen didn't press the issue and simply left. The next day, the Hatter took his daughter to the town market. But being short on money, he couldn't afford to buy her a toy she wanted. The toy vendor, who was actually the evil queen in disguise, refused to negotiate. Though his daughter sweetly said she didn't need the toy, the Hatter was visibly upset. The queen's ploy worked, and the Hatter, feeling desperate, decided to accept her offer. Despite his daughter's pleas, he sent her to stay with a neighbor while he took on the queen's job. The Mad Hatter led Regina to his castle, where he lightly spun his hat, summoning a magical whirlwind. Together, they jumped into the hat, and in the blink of an eye, they were transported to a different realm. Before entering the Mirror Gate, the Mad Hatter reiterated the rule of the hat. The same number of people that enter must leave, meaning he and Regina had to stick together. The world they entered was Wonderland, where the Queen of Hearts had taken something from Regina. Without Regina, the Mad Hatter had no way to escape Wonderland, so he reluctantly joined her in a heist. After Regina used her magic to burn through the barrier of trees, they reached the vault and retrieved the desired item. But before they could escape, the Queen of Hearts guards arrived. Luckily, Regina's magic was strong enough to fend off the pursuers. As everyone knows, working with Regina rarely ends well. In truth, Regina's mission was to rescue her imprisoned father. The Mad Hatter realized too late that Regina had known all along that the hat would only allow two people through, making him nothing more than a disposable tool. With her plan exposed, Regina made no attempt to hide it, trapping the Mad Hatter in place with her magic. He could only watch in despair as Regina and her father escaped. When the guards arrived, the defeated Mad Hatter was easily captured and brought before the Queen of Hearts. To extract the method he used to enter Wonderland, the Queen ordered his beheading. Terrified, the Mad Hatter revealed the truth. Satisfied, the Queen demanded he create another magical hat before she would let him go. But trapped in Wonderland, the Mad Hatter's hats lacked power. From that point on, he was stuck in Wonderland, endlessly making hats. Back in Storybrooke, Emma helped the Mad Hatter up to his home, where he offered her some tea as a gesture of thanks. Unaware of his intentions, Emma drank the tea, only to realize too late that she had fallen into his trap. Soon after, she lost consciousness. When she awoke, the Mad Hatter was gone. Emma skillfully freed herself from her restraints and noticed a telescope by the window pointed at the sheriff's station. Before she could think about it further, she heard the Mad Hatter sharpening a knife and quickly tried to escape. But she made a noise, and in her panic, hid in a room where she unexpectedly found Mary, who had also been captured by the Mad Hatter. Mary had been caught by the Mad Hatter during her escape. When the two attempted to flee, they were confronted by the Mad Hatter, who forced Emma to tie Mary back up. As for Emma, the Mad Hatter had a different plan. He remembered everything from the fairy tale world and knew that Regina had cursed Storybrooke. Regina had placed him in this grand mansion, and when Emma arrived in Storybrooke, she caught his attention. He started watching the sheriff's station, monitoring Emma's every move. To the Mad Hatter, Emma was the only one with magic, and he hoped she could create a magical hat to return him home. Seeing the room full of hats and the clearly unhinged man, Emma realized that this was indeed the Mad Hatter. Still, she refused to believe that the characters from the fairy tales could be real, and despite her best efforts, she couldn't make the hat work. Seeing Emma's disbelief, the Mad Hatter revealed his pain. His daughter was also in Storybrooke, but Regina had placed her with another family. Every day, the Mad Hatter watched as his daughter lived a life with others, unaware of their past. The curse erased her memories of him, leaving the Mad Hatter to suffer alone. Desperate, he forced Emma to try making a magical hat so he could return to their world. Emma pretended to agree, but when the Mad Hatter let his guard down, she knocked him out with the telescope and freed Mary. However, the Mad Hatter quickly regained consciousness and attacked Emma. In the struggle, Mary broke free from her restraints and managed to knock the Mad Hatter out of a window. When they looked outside, the Mad Hatter had vanished, leaving only his mad hat behind. Emma rushed Mary back to the sheriff's station. By the time Regina arrived, Mary was already in her cell. Mr. Gold then pulled Regina aside for a conversation, revealing that he and Regina had been behind the entire scheme. A week earlier, Mr. Gold had faced charges for assaulting the florist. To avoid prosecution, he struck a deal with Regina. They planned for Catherine to disappear, framing Mary for the crime, and then subtly nudged her to escape from Storybrooke. The plan had gone off without a hitch, except they hadn't accounted for Emma's intervention. Determined to force Mary out of Storybrooke, Regina visited her in the cell the next day, launching into a manipulative tirade that left Mary bewildered. Mary couldn't understand why Regina hated her so much, but the answer lay in the fairy tale world. It's then revealed that many years ago, the evil queen had been a normal, horse-loving young woman. Her father had always supported her, but her mother disapproved of her free spirit, insisting that she act like a proper lady and marry into royalty. Whenever she disobeyed, her mother used magic to force her into submission, making life miserable. Fortunately, she had a secret lover, the stable boy, but it was clear their love would never be approved by her mother, so the couple had to meet in secret. Eventually, the stable boy grew tired of hiding and urged her to stand up to her mother. Before they could make a plan, they were distracted by a young girl's cries for help. The future queen saw the girl's horse had gone wild and rushed to save her, displaying her exceptional riding skills. The girl she saved was none other than Snow White. The future queen thought their encounter was merely a coincidence, but days later, Snow White's father, King Leopold, visited to thank her for saving his daughter. To her surprise, the king proposed to her on the spot. Before she could even react, her mother accepted on her behalf. She was thrown into turmoil and rushed to tell her secret lover. She decided to forsake her royal life and run away with him. Overjoyed, he produced a ring and proposed on the spot, but their embrace was witnessed by Snow White, who ran away, distressed. The future queen caught up to her and explained her true love for the stable boy and how her mother stood in the way. She begged Snow White to keep their secret to protect her lover from harm. Though Snow White promised to do so, she soon betrayed her trust. That day, the future queen's mother sought out Snow White for a chat. She was aware that her daughter was unhappy and asked Snow White if she knew why, even stating that she would do anything for her daughter's happiness. Snow White, well-intentioned, believed the woman's words and, not wanting the future queen to lose her mother like she had, revealed the relationship between the future queen and the stable boy. But this good intention led to a disastrous outcome. Just as the future queen was about to elope with the stable boy, her mother intercepted them, having been fully prepared. Knowing she was no match for her mother, she tried to reason with her, but the mother feigned agreement to their marriage, only to catch the stable boy off guard and crush his heart in her hands. This act not only shattered her daughter's happiness, but also set her on the path to becoming the evil queen. Devastated, the girl obediently donned her wedding gown, preparing for the ceremony. Snow White, mistakenly believing the wedding was for the girl and the stable boy, accidentally let the truth slip. The girl's anger spiked, but now, fully embracing her darker nature, she masked her fury and calmly lied, saying that the stable boy had run away and that she was ready to become queen. Snow White, still just a child, believed her words, while the mother was pleased with her daughter's newfound composure. It was at this moment that the girl realized that her mother had known all along that the king would pass by their home and had used magic to cause Snow White's horse to panic, thus orchestrating her daughter's marriage to the king. From that moment on, the evil queen placed all the blame for her tragedy on Snow White, and the seed of revenge was planted deep within her heart. Back in the present, Mr. Gold advised Mary to speak with the prosecutor to clear her name. After some convincing, she agreed. However, things didn't go as planned. Despite Mr. Gold's warnings that she didn't need to answer all the questions, Mary let slip that she wished Catherine would disappear. This statement trapped her in a dead end, making things worse. Emma was at a loss, frustrated by the situation. Just then, the writer stepped in to help again, suggesting that finding the missing Catherine would be the key to exonerating Mary. Emma immediately had him take her back to the crime scene where she discovered a piece of a broken shovel. Naturally, their first suspect was Regina. With Henry's help as their inside man, Emma and the writer sneaked into Regina's garage, where they found the missing shovel with a broken edge. The next day, Emma returned with a search warrant, but the shovel had been mysteriously repaired overnight, rendering their efforts useless. Emma, suspecting the writer might have tipped Regina off, was deeply disappointed in him. Meanwhile, Regina visited Mary, taunting her with the knowledge that she knew Mary was innocent but was content to let her suffer. The following day, Emma could only watch as Mary was taken to court. Despite Mr. Gold's calm demeanor and belief that there was still hope, Emma felt certain they were going to lose. In her frustration, she smashed a potted plant on her desk, only to discover a hidden listening device inside. Realizing that the true mole was the editor and not the writer, she rushed to apologize to the writer. Just as Mr. Gold had predicted, a twist of fate occurred. Catherine, who had been missing for so long, suddenly reappeared in Storybrooke, safe and sound. Catherine was quickly taken to the hospital, but when questioned, she could only recall waking up in a basement after her car accident, seemingly drugged. When she regained consciousness again, she found herself back in town. With these scant details, Emma had little to go on and decided to call David to visit Catherine. Meanwhile, the writer noticed his leg twitching uncontrollably, causing him immense pain. Realizing his time might be running out, he secretly contacted Henry to begin a covert operation, targeting none other than Mr. Gold. Their plan was simple. Henry would distract Mr. Gold at the front of his shop, while the writer sneaked into the office to search for a particular item. However, before he could act, Mr. Gold caught him, forcing the writer to make a hasty exit. Soon after, Regina showed up to confront Mr. Gold, who calmly reminded her that their deal had been for Catherine to meet a grim fate. While substituting murder with kidnapping technically fulfilled their agreement, it left Regina with the task of explaining the discrepancy in the evidence. With Catherine's return, Mary was swiftly exonerated, and the town threw a party to celebrate. David showed up but was turned away at the door. Mr. Gold also attended the party, though Emma, aware that he was behind Catherine's return, had no evidence to act against him. However, Mr. Gold had grown suspicious of the writer and decided to search his room. As expected, Mr. Gold found a drawing in the writer's room, a sketch of his dagger. The next day, Emma confronted the editor, who didn't deny being Regina's mole, and even tried to justify his actions, steadfastly refusing to betray her. Meanwhile, Mr. Gold continued tailing the writer, eventually learning that he had come to Storybrooke in search of his long-lost father. Mr. Gold's expression grew somber as he remembered his own past. Back then, Mr. Gold had just transformed into the Dark One and was obsessed with protecting his son Balefire from any harm. Even the slightest injury to Balefire would drive Mr. Gold into a murderous rage, turning the perpetrator into a snail and crushing them underfoot. This overprotectiveness made the townspeople fear the father and son. Despite his dark tendencies, Mr. Gold had done good deeds, such as ending the war and bringing the children home safely. However, his reliance on magic consumed him, leading him down a darker path. Balefire, unhappy with his father's descent into madness, wished for him to return to his former self. Mr. Gold was moved by his son's plea, revealing the dagger that controlled him, explaining that only his death could break the dark curse. Unfortunately, a servant overheard this conversation, and the paranoid Mr. Gold quickly hid the dagger. Since then, Balefire was determined to find a way to break the curse without harming his father. Touched by his son's sincerity, Mr. Gold agreed to try when the time came. The next day, Balefire overheard from his friends about a powerful magical creature that could help them. Meanwhile, Mr. Gold had already killed their mute maid to ensure no loose ends. Horrified by his father's ruthless actions, Balefire decided to summon the mysterious creature that night. To his surprise, the creature turned out to be the Blue Fairy. However, even she couldn't reverse Mr. Gold's transformation, but could send him to a land without magic, a solution that would require Balefire to accompany him to an unknown world. Despite the risks, Balefire was unafraid. The Blue Fairy gave Balefire a final magic bean, and he quickly returned to take his father to an open field where they used the bean to create a portal. But when it came time to jump, Mr. Gold hesitated, paralyzed by fear. Frustrated, Balefire called his father a coward before leaping into the portal just as it closed. Mr. Gold was left alone, filled with regret. In his desperation, he sought out the Blue Fairy, who revealed that only a dark curse could take him to the land without magic. However, Mr. Gold's current power wasn't enough to create such a curse, so from that moment on, he devoted himself to researching the dark curse. Now, all signs point to the writer being Balefire, although it seems he may have come to take Mr. Gold's life. Mr. Gold eventually decided to confront the writer after a heart-to-heart with Dr. Hopper. They met at Mr. Gold's old cabin, where Mr. Gold revealed the truth. The writer didn't hide his identity any longer and acknowledged who he was. With the chance to finally express his remorse, Mr. Gold sincerely apologized, seeking his son's forgiveness. They embraced, seemingly putting their past behind them. After their reconciliation, Mr. Gold knew that Balefire had always wanted to destroy the dagger, so he took his son to retrieve it from its hiding place. He had hidden the dagger to keep it out of Regina's hands, but now he was ready to give it to his son as a sign that he no longer needed magic. But to his shock, the man immediately commanded Mr. Gold to obey him, revealing that he wasn't Balefire after all. Balefire would never try to control him. Fortunately, the lack of magic in this world meant the command had no effect. Realizing his plan had failed, the writer admitted that he had only wanted to awaken Mr. Gold's paternal instincts and confessed that he had come to Storybrooke to convince Emma to believe in magic. However, even as he neared death, he hadn't succeeded. Surprisingly, Mr. Gold spared his life and encouraged him to try convincing Emma once more. The next day at the station, Emma received a surprising turn of events. The editor turned himself in, confessing that he had kidnapped Catherine, held her in a basement, bribed hospital staff to alter the heart test results, and even stolen Regina's skeleton key to plant the knife in Mary's home. He claimed he had done it all for a sensational story to reclaim his place at the newspaper. However, Emma wasn't convinced by his story. She knew he was acting under Regina's orders and decided to stop wasting time arguing with him, instead turning her attention to battling Regina for custody of Henry. To that end, Emma enlisted Mr. Gold as her lawyer, preparing for a courtroom showdown. Remembering Mr. Gold's words, the writer tried to take Emma to witness magic firsthand, but she was too preoccupied with an urgent call from Henry to listen. Henry's emergency was a new story in the fairy tale book, featuring Pinocchio. Oddly, the story was unfinished. The scene then dives into this tale of Pinocchio as it unfolds. At that time, Pinocchio was still a wooden puppet when he and the carpenter Geppetto encountered the Mad Hatter at sea. In a desperate bid for survival, they jumped overboard. When Geppetto awoke, Pinocchio had lost all his life force, reverting to a lifeless puppet. Fortunately, the Blue Fairy arrived just in time, using her magic to turn Pinocchio into a real boy. From then on, everything was happy, and Pinocchio lived with Geppetto and Jiminy Cricket. But one day, the Blue Fairy brought alarming news that the evil queen was about to unleash the dark curse. Because of that, the Blue Fairy asked Geppetto to carve the last magic tree into a wardrobe to protect Snow White's child. The tree could actually hold 2 people, and the original plan was to send both Snow White and Prince Charming inside. However, Geppetto realized that since Pinocchio wasn't a real boy, he would turn back into wood when the curse hit. So he demanded that Pinocchio take one of the spots in the wardrobe, threatening not to build it otherwise. Reluctantly, the Blue Fairy agreed to Geppetto's terms, lying to the others that the wardrobe could only hold 1 person. When the curse descended, Snow White had given birth early, and the Blue Fairy decided that both Snow White and her daughter needed to go into the wardrobe, as there would be no one left to protect Emma otherwise. But even then, Geppetto refused to comply. The moment the Blue Fairy left, he put Pinocchio into the wardrobe, urging him to take care of Emma. The father and son shared a tearful goodbye before Pinocchio was transported to the real world. Disoriented by the sight of airplanes in the sky, Pinocchio tried to run back into the fairy tale world but was knocked unconscious. When he awoke, baby Emma had already been transported into the tree hollow. At first, Pinocchio followed Geppetto's instructions and diligently cared for Emma at the orphanage. But one day, the leader of the orphanage kids stole the headmistress's money and planned to take the other children and run away. Pinocchio, unable to resist the temptation, ultimately chose to leave Emma behind and venture into the outside world. At this point, it's clear that the mysterious writer is indeed Pinocchio. However, his situation is dire. One of his legs has inexplicably reverted to wood. Desperate to make Emma believe in magic, Pinocchio sought out Mr. Gold for help. Unexpectedly, he encountered Geppetto's reincarnation at the pawn shop, the first time he had seen his father since arriving in Storybrooke. But there were more pressing matters at hand. Mr. Gold, fully aware of Pinocchio's intentions, agreed to assist. When Emma later visited the pawn shop to see Mr. Gold, he informed her that he couldn't help her regain custody of Henry. With no other options, Emma turned to Pinocchio for help. Seizing the opportunity, Pinocchio took her out of Storybrooke to a mysterious location. Meanwhile, Mary, having cleared her name, returned to teaching. Regina, having failed in her schemes, couldn't even win a verbal sparring match with Mary. Frustrated and vulnerable after Mary's harsh words, Regina turned her attention to David, attempting to seduce him. But David was having none of it, leaving Regina enraged and powerless. That evening, Pinocchio brought Emma to the diner where she had been found as a baby. He revealed that he was the wooden boy who had carried her to safety. To prove his story, he took her to the tree where everything began, recounting the full history of events. Pinocchio had been vacationing in Phuket when Emma decided to stay in Storybrooke, and his leg began to ache, a painful reminder of his mission to guide Emma to save the town. So he rushed back to Storybrooke, hoping to convince Emma, and showed her his wooden leg. But because Emma refused to believe in magic bullshit, all she saw was a normal human leg. Despite his desperate pleas for Emma to fulfill her destiny and save the residents of Storybrooke, she became even more resistant and decided to flee from her responsibilities. Heartbroken, Pinocchio returned to Geppetto's reincarnation, choosing to spend his remaining time with him. Emma, however, decided to take Henry out of Storybrooke in the dead of night, intending never to return. The scene shifts to Regina having dinner with Henry when Emma suddenly bursts in, accusing her of wrongdoing. In a flash, Regina was bound to an apple tree by the residents of Storybrooke, who had all regained their memories of the fairy tale world. As the curse weakened, Regina's apples rotted, and she faced her final judgment. Emma ended her life with a sword. But this was only Regina's nightmare, a manifestation of her deepest fears. Upon waking, Regina rushed to Henry's room but found nothing amiss. Little did she know, Emma was planning to take Henry far away from Storybrooke. When Henry realized something was wrong, he grabbed the steering wheel, averting disaster. Henry insisted that Emma return to save the residents of Storybrooke, and eventually she agreed and returned to town. Meanwhile, Regina noticed her apples beginning to rot for real and realized that the curse was weakening because of Emma. However, the curse's design, courtesy of Mr. Gold, dictated that killing Emma would break it entirely. Regina demanded that Mr. Gold alter the terms, but with no magic in the town, and Mr. Gold unwilling to strike a deal, she was forced to handle her feud with Emma on her own. Desperate, Regina turned to the Mad Hatter for help. It turned out that she had kept his magical hat and preserved a bit of magic. To get him to cooperate, she once again dangled empty promises, and the Mad Hatter, ever gullible, agreed to help. Meanwhile, Henry sought out Pinocchio, hoping he could stop Emma from leaving. Pinocchio confessed everything to Henry, acknowledging that with little time left, it was up to Henry to make a difference. As Emma continued her fight for custody, Jiminy Cricket pointed out that her battle with Regina would only harm Henry, and it would be best if they could settle things amicably. Regina took the Mad Hatter to a secret underground chamber. To activate the magical hat, she poured in all the remaining magical items she had collected, but nothing happened. In desperation, she added the ring her stable boy had given her, and finally the hat began to spin. However, the magic wasn't strong enough to open a portal back to the fairy tale world. Still, it allowed them to retrieve items from across dimensions, which was enough for Regina's purposes. After some maneuvering, the Mad Hatter pulled a half-eaten apple from the hat, the very one that had put Snow White into a deep sleep. The scene shifts to Prince Charming after he was captured by the king's men. For his attempted escape, the prince was sentenced to death. But just as the guillotine was about to fall, the blade miraculously turned into a splash of cold water. It was the evil queen who intervened. Of course, she had no intention of sparing him out of kindness. She planned to use the prince to lure Snow White into a trap. That very night, Snow White arrived at the castle along with the dwarfs. Red Riding Hood reported that both the prince and the evil queen were inside. Despite the obvious trap, Snow White decided to storm the castle and rescue her beloved. With her command, the final assault began. The Blue Fairy, indebted to Grumpy, was also called in to assist. Under their joint force, the king's soldiers were no match and fell one by one, especially with the added help of the fairy dust. Soon, Snow White reached the dungeon where Prince Charming was held. But instead of just the prison bars, there was also a magic mirror in the way. The prince was actually being held in the evil queen's castle. Before the star-crossed lovers could exchange words, the evil queen interrupted through the mirror, proposing that they meet at the place where their enmity began to negotiate, with Snow White not allowed to bring any weapons. Knowing that storming the evil queen's castle would lead to unnecessary sacrifices, and not wanting to endanger her comrades, Snow White agreed to meet the queen alone. They met at the evil queen's family stables. The evil queen demanded that Snow White eat the cursed apple, or else she would kill Prince Charming. Left with no choice, Snow White tearfully took a bite of the apple and immediately fell unconscious. By the time her comrades arrived, it was too late. Due to the curse, Snow White had stopped breathing, and everyone believed she was dead as a piece of shit. Though Prince Charming sensed something was wrong, he was powerless in his dungeon. Back in the present, Regina decided to use the same trick again, this time by baking the poisoned apple into a pie to trick Emma. Coincidentally, Emma came to Regina to negotiate, offering to leave Storybrooke forever if Regina allowed her to visit her son Henry whenever she wanted. Regina agreed and even offered Emma the apple pie as a gesture of goodwill. Emma, suspecting nothing, accepted it. Convinced she had won, Regina went to mock Mr. Gold, knowing he had been trying to break the curse. Mr. Gold, however, warned her that magic always comes with a price. And just as he predicted, when Henry heard that Emma had accepted Regina's terms and the pie, he immediately realized it was poisoned. But no matter how much he tried to warn his mother, she didn't believe him. Left with no other option, Henry took a bite of the pie himself. Seeing Henry collapse, Emma realized something was terribly wrong. She rushed him to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't find any trace of poison. It was then that Emma finally believed in the existence of magic. As she picked up the storybook, memories of the fairy tale world flashed through her mind. Regina also arrived at the hospital but was immediately confronted by a furious Emma. Cornered, Regina admitted to the dark curse and the poisoning. But as she had never used magic in this world, Regina wasn't sure what consequences the magic might bring. Realizing they needed help, the two rushed to find Mr. Gold. He revealed that true love is the only force that can transcend time and space to break all curses. He had previously created a potion of true love using the hair of Snow White and Prince Charming. The potion was still in Storybrooke, hidden inside the body of one of Regina's old allies, whom she had locked in her basement. Emma would have to take up her father's sword and retrieve the potion herself. So, what does Prince Charming have to do with all this? Let's return to the fairy tale world. At the time, the evil queen's guards were about to execute Prince Charming, but he seized an opportunity to fight back and attempted to escape the castle. Just in time, the huntsman, who had been imprisoned by the evil queen, intervened. He helped the prince by defeating the guards, unlocking his chains and providing him with supplies, allowing Prince Charming to flee. The huntsman had done everything he could to buy time for the prince, but the evil queen used her magic mirror to transport Prince Charming to the enchanted forest. Without any magic, the prince soon became lost in the forest. Suddenly, Rumple appeared, revealing that he had enchanted the ring left by the prince's mother. The ring would lead him to Snow White, but there was a catch. The prince would have to make a deal with Rumple. The prince, furious at the mention of a deal, attacked Rumple, but was quickly overpowered. Left with no other choice, the prince agreed to the deal. Rumple then demanded the prince to hide the potion of true love inside a creature's stomach. So, following Rumple's instructions, the prince made his way to the castle of Maleficent, the evil queen's old ally. As it turns out, the creature Rumple mentioned was none other than Maleficent herself, who could transform into a massive dragon. Completely unprepared for this revelation, the prince had no choice but to rely on his agility to dodge the dragon's attacks. After a tense battle, he managed to leap onto the dragon's back and force the golden egg containing the potion of true love into the dragon's stinky mouth before making a hasty escape. Furious, the dragon could do nothing but roar like a goose in frustration. True to his word, Rumple rewarded the prince by returning the enchanted ring and even giving him a new set of clothes. What followed was the iconic scene where Prince Charming awakened Snow White with true love's kiss. He then proposed to her using the magical ring, and the two lovers were finally reunited. However, Snow White quickly remembered that the king and the evil queen were still threats, and she resolved to join Prince Charming in reclaiming their kingdom. Back in the present, David approached Mary once more, hoping to start fresh, but she rejected him again. Heartbroken after being turned down repeatedly, David finally decided to leave Storybrooke for good. Meanwhile, before retrieving the potion of true love, Emma and Regina both visited Henry to say their goodbyes. The Mad Hatter confronted Regina, demanding that she keep her promise. As expected, Regina reneged, claiming that since the plan hadn't succeeded, the deal was off, and she taunted him by saying he lacked the courage or ability to take revenge. At the same time, Emma sought help from Pinocchio, but because of the curse, he had already started turning back into wood and couldn't assist her. With no one to operate the elevator that led to the dungeon, Emma had to face the witch alone. To make matters worse, Regina had punished Maleficent by permanently transforming her into a dragon. Unlike Prince Charming, however, Emma opted for modern methods and pulled out her gun, hoping to show the dragon that times had changed. But the gun was ineffective, and Emma had to resort to using a sword. In the end, it was the sword that defeated the dragon, reducing it to ashes, allowing Emma to retrieve the potion. After completing her mission, Emma hurried to take the elevator back up, only to find it malfunctioning. Suddenly, Mr. Gold appeared, revealing that Regina had abandoned her and tampered with the elevator. He demanded that Emma toss up the potion. Reluctantly, Emma complied. When she finally made it back up, she discovered that Regina had been tied up by Mr. Gold, who had already made his escape. It became clear to both women that they had been pawns in Mr. Gold's elaborate plan. But before they could confront him, they received a call from the hospital saying that Henry's condition had worsened dramatically and the doctors were struggling to save him. In the chaos, the Mad Hatter took the opportunity to sneak into the basement and free Belle, instructing her to go straight to Mr. Gold and tell him how Regina had imprisoned her for years. Belle found her way to Mr. Gold's pawn shop, where he was overjoyed to see his long-missing lover alive. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Emma and Regina arrived too late. Henry had been pronounced dead. In her grief, Emma kissed Henry on the forehead, and to everyone's astonishment, this act of true love revived him, breaking the dark curse. With the curse lifted, the townspeople regained their memories of the fairy tale world, and David and Mary were finally reunited. Realizing she had lost, Regina fled home, awaiting her inevitable judgment. However, no one anticipated Mr. Gold's next move. He took Belle to the wishing well and poured the potion of true love into it. In an instant, purple smoke began to rise from the well, spreading rapidly across Storybrooke. It turns out Mr. Gold was planning to reintroduce magic into the world. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.